Yeah, so with that, I think we can move on to Sweet versus Heat, segment brought to you by our friends at Subway, whose new Sweet versus Heat chicken sandwiches are making people choose which side they're on. If you don't know how the segment works, basically, Cash and I are both going to pick one sweet player who we feel like has been making some pretty sweet moves as of late, and one hot team that we feel like has been tearing it up. And as I said, I'm going to start this off just by talking about the Sixers, because even apart from this game against the Celtics, as huge as that was, I mean, this was their sixth straight win, and that run also included a monster win over the Bucks. And I get the sense that they're just finally starting to figure it out. And, you know, I talked about all those four guys making big plays down the stretch of that game against Boston. You know, during this winning streak, they have a 115.7 offensive rating. They're now 3 games clear of the Pacers and 4 up on the Celtics for the 3 seed in the East. So I think we can pretty comfortably say that they're going to finish in that 3 seed. And, you know, look, we've known for a while, ever since they made the trades that they've made, that this team just has a ton of talent. Maybe the most top-end talent in the Eastern Conference. And it was always just going to be a question of how it fit together. And I feel like we finally started to see that happen. And, you know, for one thing, Embiid has been playing out of his mind. Jimmy Butler, I think, has been starting to take over a little bit larger share of the offense, especially down the stretch. I think he's kind of turned into their closer. And so I think just as they've gotten more familiar with each other, they, you know, have started to get comfortable in their roles and figure out what the optimization is going to be between them. What do you think, Cash, about how they've been playing lately? And again, where do you kind of see them slotting in compared to their Eastern Conference competition?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how they've been playing lately, you mentioned the winning streak and the 115 plus offensive rating during that winning streak. So their starting and closing lineup, the 5-man unit we've been talking about, Ben Simmons, JJ Redick, Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid. If you go back to just the deadline, basically since Harris joined this team, that 5-man unit's offensive rating over 119 points per 100 possessions. As usual, a Sixers starting lineup has the best net rating in the league since the deadline. This team is good, man. They're, in terms of how they stack up in the East, I know Milwaukee's got the larger sample size behind them, and they've obviously, you know, they've got the MVP frontrunner. They've got, you know, a load to handle as well with the amount of shooting they can surround Giannis with. But, man, I don't know. Like, you put these two teams in a playoff series, and again, I think I might be inclined to go with the team that just has more top-end talent and has more weapons that can take over a game, take over a series, swing a series. I think if I had to choose right now, like in terms of ranking these teams and how I think they'd fare in playoff battles against each other, I think I might go Philly 1, Toronto 2, and Milwaukee down to 3.
Wow.
I think it's more so just how much I like Philly's top-end talent as opposed to slandering the Bucks. I just think they're that good.
I would still point out, I do think their lack of traditional point guard play stands out sometimes, and there are times when, you know, Tobias Harris is taking a large share of the offense and the ball handling duties, which I don't think is necessarily ideal. They have workarounds for that, and I think, you know, one of those things is just having Redick there as basically a dribble handoff nuclear option, which negates the need for on-ball creation. Like, you don't need an off-the-bounce initiator when you have a guy like Redick who can basically generate good looks just by pulling the trigger out of those DHOs, you know, or catching and shooting off of pin downs. Because, you know, off-ball creation, I think, when you have a player who's as good at it as Redick, can be just as valuable. But I also think that they maybe don't use Simmons as a screener as much as they should. And I think part of the reason for that is that they don't have a pick and roll point guard. And, you know, doing so with Harris and Butler just, you know, isn't necessarily quite as viable an option because those guys aren't elite passers. So there's that. But, you know, I also like the fact that now they aren't quite as reliant on Redick offensively as they were before. And so if he's getting targeted defensively, like, they can just swap him out in crunch time and throw James Ennis in there, which they did for a spell against the Celtics. And suddenly they don't really have a weak spot to attack defensively. I think, you know, defending point guards can still be an issue in those configurations, but, like, you can basically, you know, now that they have Harris, use him as that kind of off-ball threat. and leave Redick on the bench, and then you're running out a jumbo lineup where you don't really have much of a soft spot defensively. So they have a ton of versatility, a ton of size, and just a lot of options. I think, for me, I would just like to see them using a few more sort of pick and roll combinations and seeing what they can get. Because as much as running their offense through Embiid in the post can be really, really effective, if something happens like an Al Horford is taking him out of the game, his passing out of the post is fine. It's just pretty straightforward, and he'll make the obvious pass and he'll do it well, but he's not making passes that are like one step ahead of the defense and like diming up shooters on the perimeter. So I guess that's one thing that I would kind of look at and circle and say, if there's a reason that I'm not as bullish on them as an Eastern Conference favorite, that would be it. But I just think they're playing great right now, and as they continue to get comfortable playing with each other, they're only going to get better.
Yeah. Before we move on to my hot team of the week, I did want to mention quickly, we were talking there about like how the East stacks up from the playoffs. We didn't really mention the Celtics in that conversation, and to be honest, rightfully so. This team, I just want to point out, this team needs to go 7-3 to finish the season to even win 50 games. This was a team people thought was going to coast to 60. Well, some people, Bostonians, thought they were going to coast to 60. They're going to struggle to even win 50.